Many of us have heard, if you want success, remember, location, location, location. And in the last 3 weeks, we have traveled to a variety of locations. On the first weekend of Lent, the location was in the desert. With Jesus, we're driven to the desert to face the demons in our lives, those that tempt us, and how we commit ourselves to doing the will of God. Last week, we went to the mountaintops, experienced a transfiguration, a glimpse of the glory that not only Christ has, but we are also called to one day share in. And in to do that, there was a voice that came from the clouds. My beloved Son, listen to him. And today, we're at the temple. And we see what Jesus did in response for what he saw. The little badges that we wore several years ago, and sometimes people still say, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And first hearing this gospel and seeing the doves and everything going on, how many of us would have really thought Jesus would have taken out a whip? Deacon Dave has a cow whip, and he was going to lend it for me to use it here for a prop. I decided that might not be safe for you nor me. This instance of cleansing the temple on this pathway to God is very significant. It's one of the passages in the gospel that appears in all four. And the rest of the gospels is always done right after Jesus comes in to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. As he's brought in his glory, and he hits the temple, he sees what he sees, and he does what he did in today's gospel. But it's John, that we heard from, transplants it. He has Jesus going to the Passover many times in Jerusalem, not just the one right before his death, but he appears several times. That was the custom. And he goes in, and it's right at the beginning. It's in chapter 2. It's an immediate the event after the wedding feast of Cana. The feast of abundance, the feast of bringing joy and celebration to people's lives. And right from there, he goes to this experience. What is the point? One is you have to have a visual. The temple area in Jerusalem, the length was 4 1/2 lengths of a football field. That's how huge this area was. The buildings of the temple were 10 stories, with the holies of holies 16 stories high. In that day and age, it would have been a massive place. Had a capability of slaughtering for sacrifice 20,000 lambs in a day. A lot was going on. Ritual purity had taken over morality and how it was used. As people came to Jerusalem to offer sacrifice, that goes back to the beginning of that relationship of God with his people, it came to the point that the sacrifices that people brought as they traveled throughout Israel and the Holy Land, well, they were dusty, they were dirty, they were not fit. This is not good enough for God. We have something proper. And oh, yes, to pay for it? Well, you can't use Roman coins. You have to exchange them for the temple coins. So what was initially as a good thing in the sense of purity to the temple became an avenue for extortion. And Jesus says we need to get rid of that. In everything in John's gospel, it's a symbol. As Jesus is saying in today's gospel, he was not just talking about that physical temple, huge as it was, but the temple of his own body. And it's the temple of our own bodies that Jesus is also addressing today in the location of taking us through the gospel to the resurrection. As we travel with Jesus and are confronted with the demons in our lives and the things that tempt us, and are called constantly back, what is the will of God in our lives? And the will of God comes to us, again, being transferred to the words of Jesus himself and his way, his truth, and his life. Jesus knows for us to feel that, to see that oneness, to experience that end result of joy that he brought to the wedding feast of Cana, we have to allow ourselves to be cleansed. What's in the temple of this creation that's obstructing, that's got out of shape, that extorts people in our lives or our own relationship with God? As the song goes, we got to let it go. And Christ turns the tables to point us to his presence. And it comes back to the basics, the 10 Commandments. As Paul says in our second reading, in the eyes of the world today, they seem to be foolish. But the wisdom of God tells us the 10 Commandments and how we live them is an avenue of witness and authenticity to relationship of God and others. Because when we forget to put God first in our lives, we can see how the foundation of the world starts to crumble. When we see different sects taking the name of God and using that name to do evil and murder and harm people in such violent ways, all in the name of God, that's taking the name of God in vain. When we don't take time out to ponder and reunite and recreate that witness of God, making holy a day or a time in our day, then all of our relationships start to frail. The other commandments are the same too. When we hear of notorious people who get in the headlines and they're proclaimed of immorality, coaches, people in the church, people in different walks of life of authorities who have misused sexuality, people raise up and say foul. Even the mafia doesn't like anyone to lie or to steal from them. The commandments are the commandments. They bring us back to a truth, bring us back to the beginning of our relationship of how to live in harmony with one another and also be connected to God. And they're not foolish. They're not out of date. And Jesus brings us back to those commandments this day, challenging us to look at our temple of our bodies and how do we let go of those things that cannot be there in order for us to have holiness and wholeness. We can't give what we don't have, and we can't shape the world to a better place until we ourselves are following that same journey that Christ, that his will be done. And it's his will that we follow and listen to, as in the transfiguration words of God the Father. And we allow him to cleanse us from anything in our lives that obstructs us to receive that presence, to hear his words, to live his life. For John, in order to travel through the gospel that he wants to bring us, of joy, of oneness, of the true nice of God, this is the path we need to start with. It doesn't come at the end. It's at the very beginning. So let us, as we're still in the first half of our Lenten journey, allow these words to touch our lives, to purify the temple that we are given, and in turn, make it a sacred place in our relationships with all.